Cries of the Black Lake. It was the dead of night when I first saw her. After a full day of hiking, my friends and I had pitched our tents right in the middle of Blackwood Forest, on the edge of the dark lake. Far from the hustle and bustle of city life, there was nothing but peace in this desolate place, or so we thought. That night, I was trying to sleep when I suddenly heard a faint rustling outside my tent. I thought it might be an animal, but then the rustling turned into a soft, feminine hum. The sound was like an old lullaby, but instead of comfort, it carried a strange unease. I opened my eyes and strained my ears. The sound was clearer now. It was coming from the direction of the lake. My heart began to pound. I gathered my courage and slowly unzipped the tent. Peeking out, in the darkness of the night, the lake water looked utterly black, and something glimmered on its surface in the moonlight. It was a woman standing by the lakeside, her back to me. Her hair was disheveled, and she wore an old, tattered white dress. She was humming, her hands moving slowly in the air as if she were beckoning someone towards her. I thought perhaps we had pitched our tents on private property, but then she slowly turned her head, and what I saw sent a shiver down my spine. Her eyes were like hollow sockets, filled with deep darkness, and her face looked like a skeleton, skin shriveled and clinging to the bones. A horrifying smile played on her lips, a smile that could not belong to any living person. At that moment, I remembered the local tales I'd heard about Blackwood Forest. They said that centuries ago, a woman named Elara was declared a witch and drowned in this very lake. She still roamed its waters, they claimed, searching for those who would become targets of her vengeance. Her gaze was directly on me, as if she had seen me. Her smile widened, and her thin hands began to stretch out towards me. I was frozen with fear, my tongue tied. I felt like I would never escape. She took a step forward, then another, and with each step, her humming grew louder and more terrifying, as if she was pulling me towards her. I screamed with all my might and scrambled back into the tent, zipping it shut and trying to wake my friends. They were asleep and couldn't understand what was happening. When I told them everything I had seen, they initially laughed, but when they saw the genuine terror in my eyes, they became serious. We immediately packed our belongings and fled into the darkness of the forest without a second thought. I didn't have the courage to look back, but I still remember those cold, empty eyes and that terrifying smile. Since then, none of us have ever returned to Blackwood Forest or the Black Lake. But even today, when I'm alone at night, I hear that faint hum, and it feels as if Elara is still calling out to me. The Mummy of Crooked Creek. We were 4 friends: Dylan, Jesse, Mason, and I, Clara. We were all archaeology students looking for a unique adventure during summer break. Our professor had told us about an ancient Native American burial ground near Crooked Creek that had never been officially recorded. It was an opportunity we couldn't pass up, so we decided to go there. The path to Crooked Creek led through a dense, swampy area, where trees twisted into strange shapes and an eerie silence hung in the air. When we reached the supposed location of the burial ground, we found an old, broken wooden idol with empty, hollow eyes. Ancient tales from local tribes spoke of this place being guarded by a mummy woman, a spirit who wouldn't allow outsiders to disturb her tribe's sacred ground. Naturally, we dismissed it as mere old folklore. We began our excavation the next day, and on the 3rd day, we found what we were looking for. In a shallow grave, we unearthed an ancient mummy, wrapped in earth, with a strange stone necklace around its neck. Its face was shriveled, but its eyes, though closed, held a strange, unsettling dread. Jesse was the first to touch the mummy. Quote, "I need to get this necklace off," he said excitedly. As he touched the necklace, a sudden cold gust of wind swept through, and a faint light emanated from the stone. We thought it was just a coincidence. We decided to take the mummy and the necklace back to our tent for further study. Night had fallen deeply when we began examining the mummy inside the tent. We all sat together, the flashlight beam illuminating the mummy. Suddenly, from outside the tent, we heard a faint hum in an ancient language. The sound was as if someone was coming from far away, but it carried a strange depth and chill. The first incident occurred around midnight. We were all asleep when a loud scream suddenly jolted me awake. It was Dylan's scream. I sat up and saw him trembling violently in his sleeping bag, his eyes wide with terror. She was on top of me, he stammered. Her face was staring at me. We shined our flashlights, but there was nothing there. We tried to comfort him, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. He couldn't speak much more that night, just kept trembling. In the morning, we tried to calm Dylan, but he had fallen into complete silence, his eyes holding a strange terror. I shrugged it off, and we continued our work throughout the day. When we returned in the evening, the atmosphere felt even more ominous. The second night, we were all more vigilant. We decided to sleep closer to each other and kept our flashlights on. It must have been around 2 in the morning when we heard a strange sound, like dry leaves rustling. The sound was coming from outside the tent. Then it felt as if something was pressing against the tent wall. Mason grabbed his flashlight and moved towards the sound. "Who's there?" he called out. Suddenly, a section of the tent ripped open, and Mason screamed. By the time we reached him, he was lying on the ground, with deep scratches on his face and sheer terror in his eyes. He could only manage to whisper, "Her hand." It touched me, and then he took his last breath. We were all in shock. Mason was dead. We knew for certain this was no ordinary thing. It was truly the mummy woman. We immediately decided to leave, but due to the swampy terrain and the darkness of the night, we couldn't see the way out. We thought we'd wait until morning, but that was our biggest mistake. On the third night, fear was at its peak. The 3 of us, Dylan, Jesse, and I, sat together in the middle of the tent, near the mummy. We held each other's hands, flinching at every sound. Suddenly, the tent's temperature dropped rapidly, becoming so cold it felt like we were in a freezer. Then we heard the same ancient hum again, this time very close. Jesse screamed, "She's here!" A dark shadow emerged from the tent's entrance, slowly taking the form of a woman. She looked like the mummy, but her eyes glowed a fiery red, and a horrifying smile was plastered on her lips. She let out a piercing, shrieking laugh that echoed in our ears. She moved towards Dylan. Dylan tried to run, but the mummy woman seized him with one hand. Dylan began to scream, "Help! Help!" But his voice faded, and in a few moments, he fell lifeless to the ground. The mummy woman tossed his body aside like a limp doll. Dylan was dead too. Now it was just Jesse and me. Jesse shrieked, "She's going to kill us all." The mummy woman was now advancing towards me. I saw the same hatred in her eyes that I had read about in the ancient tribal stories from history books. In my hand was the same stone necklace we had taken from the mummy's neck. I gathered my courage. As the mummy woman approached me, I saw her eyes blazing like red embers. Just as she moved to attack me, I instinctively threw the necklace at her. The necklace struck her chest. A horrifying shriek erupted, and the mummy woman's body began to convulse. The stone necklace absorbed into her chest, and her body slowly withered, like ancient wood burning to ash. She mumbled something in a deep, terrifying voice, and then dissolved into a black smoke, scattering into nothingness. Peace suddenly filled the tent, and the cold receded. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping. Jesse was frozen with fear. As dawn broke, I roused Jesse, and without wasting another moment, we both fled the Crooked Creek area. We didn't look back. Even today, when I think about Crooked Creek, my skin crawls. Dylan and Mason's deaths changed me forever. I had defeated the mummy woman, but her memories and the terror of that night will always live inside me. And I know that the curse of that ancient burial ground isn't truly gone. That spirit has merely found some peace for a while. The Curse of Black Willow Farm. We were 4 friends: Ethan, Noah, Summer, and I, Olivia. We loved adventures and were always searching for desolate, mysterious places. One day, we found Black Willow Farm, marked on an old map, hidden deep in the forests of Virginia. Local tales warned that the place was cursed, home to a witch who had lived there for centuries. Naturally, I dismissed these stories as mere folklore, and we decided to go there for a weekend. The path to the farm led through a dense forest where sunlight barely penetrated. When we arrived, a dilapidated wooden farmhouse stood before us, its windows shattered and doors hanging precariously. Covered in dust and cobwebs, their house, even in its desolation, held a strange sense of dread. Ethan was the first to step inside, flashlight in hand. "Look, there's nothing here, just an old, decrepit house," he said, laughing. The rest of us followed him in. Inside the house, there was a strange odor, like old wood and dirt, mixed with something decaying. We searched the rooms. Everything was empty and broken. Night had fallen deeply when we decided to sleep in one of the farmhouse's large rooms. We laid out our sleeping bags and started a fire. Noah began telling some scary stories on his phone, but an eerie silence hung in the air, more terrifying than the tales themselves. The first incident occurred around midnight. We were all asleep when a loud scream suddenly jolted me awake. It was Summer's scream. I sat up and saw her trembling violently in her sleeping bag, her eyes wide with terror. She was there, she stammered, pointing to a corner of the room where only darkness lay. We shined our flashlights, but there was nothing. We tried to comfort her, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. In the morning, we tried to calm Summer, but she kept insisting she had seen a woman's shadow with red eyes. I shrugged it off, and we spent the day exploring the farm. When we returned in the evening, the atmosphere felt even more ominous. The second night, we were all more vigilant. We decided to sleep closer to each other and kept the fire burning brightly. It must have been around 2 in the morning when we heard a strange scratching sound, like someone dragging their nails across wood. The sound came from the ceiling, then the walls, and then it seemed to be right beside us. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and moved towards the sound. "Who's there?" he called out. Suddenly, there was a loud thud and Ethan screamed. By the time we reached him, he was lying on the ground, with deep scratches on his body and sheer terror in his eyes. He could only manage to whisper, "Her eyes." She was staring at me, and then he took his last breath. We were all in shock. Ethan was dead. We knew for certain this was no ordinary thing. It was truly the witch. We immediately decided to leave, but the darkness outside was so thick we couldn't see the path. We thought we'd wait until morning, but that was our biggest mistake. On the third night, fear was at its peak. The 3 of us, Noah, Summer, and I, sat together in the middle of the room, close to the fire. We held each other's hands, flinching at every sound. Suddenly, the room's temperature dropped rapidly, becoming so cold it felt like we were in a freezer. Then we heard a rustling sound, like something slithering towards us. Summer screamed, "She's here!" A dark shadow emerged from the other corner of the room, slowly taking the form of a woman. Her hair was disheveled, her face a skeletal structure, and her eyes glowed like burning embers. She let out a horrifying, piercing laugh that echoed in our ears. She moved towards Noah. Noah tried to run, but the witch seized him with one hand. Noah began to scream, "Help! Help!" But his voice faded, and in a few moments, he fell lifeless to the ground. The witch tossed his body aside like a limp doll. Noah was dead too. Now it was just Summer and me. Summer was unconscious from fear. The witch was now advancing towards me. I saw that she held an old, rusty knife in her hand. I remembered the locals saying that this witch could only be killed by her own knife, the one she had used in her final moments. I gathered my courage. As the witch came closer, I saw her gripping the knife tightly. Just as she moved to attack me, I lunged to the side and tried to snatch the knife from her hand. A struggle ensued. Her strength was inhuman, but I fought for my life. Her screams and laughter echoed in the room. For a brief moment, her grip loosened, and I plunged the knife with all my might into her chest. A horrifying shriek erupted, and the witch's body dissolved into a black mist, scattering. Light suddenly filled the room, and the cold receded. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping. Summer was still unconscious. As dawn broke, I roused Summer, and without wasting another moment, we both fled that farmhouse. We didn't look back. Even today, when I think about Black Willow Farm, my hair stands on end. Ethan and Noah's deaths changed me forever. I had killed that witch, but her memories and the terror of that night will always live inside me. And I know that the curse of Black Willow Farm isn't truly gone. The witch has simply gone to sleep for a while. The Witch of the Shivering Woods. We were 4 best friends: Olivia, Sophia, Ava, and I, Harper. We were all in our final year of college and desperately wanted one last memorable adventure. We'd heard rumors about the Shivering Woods near our town, where an evil witch supposedly resided in an old cabin. Locals whispered that she had been targeting lone girls who dared to venture into her territory for centuries. Naturally, we dismissed it as mere urban legend, a scary story we wanted to experience for ourselves, and decided to go there on Halloween night. It was midnight when we arrived at the edge of the woods in our Jeep. The trees were so dense that the moonlight barely filtered through. As we stepped into the forest, a strange scent filled the air, like decaying leaves, mixed with something ancient. After walking for a while, we spotted the cabin, a small, dilapidated wooden structure with broken windows and the door hanging askew. Olivia, always the bravest, smiled and stepped forward. "Come on, girls, don't be scared. It's just an old shack." She pushed open the creaking door, and a gust of cold, damp air rushed out. Inside, dust and cobwebs reigned supreme. An eerie silence hung in the air, so profound that even our footsteps sounded loud. We began searching the rooms, all of which were empty and decaying. In one room, there was an old wooden chair with strands of hair scattered on it, as if someone had just been sitting there. Night had deepened when we decided to sleep in one of the cabin's larger rooms. We laid out our sleeping bags and started a small fire. We all sat close to each other, flinching at every faint sound. From outside the woods, there were sounds like someone quietly weeping. The first incident occurred around midnight. We were all asleep when a loud scream suddenly jolted me awake. It was Sophia's scream. I sat up and saw her trembling violently in her sleeping bag, her eyes wide with terror. She pulled my hair. She stammered. She was right over me. Her breath was so cold. We shined our flashlights, but there was nothing there. We tried to comfort her, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. She couldn't speak much more that night, just kept trembling. In the morning, we tried to calm Sophia, but she had fallen into complete silence, a strange emptiness in her eyes. I shrugged it off, and we continued with our activities throughout the day. When we returned in the evening, the atmosphere felt even more ominous. It felt as if someone was constantly watching us from among the trees. The second night, we were all more vigilant. We decided to sleep closer to each other and kept our flashlights on. It must have been around 2 in the morning when we heard a strange rattling sound, like someone dragging a wooden stick across the ground. The sound was coming from outside the cabin. Then it felt as if something was pressing against the cabin wall. Olivia grabbed her flashlight and moved towards the sound. "Who's there?" she called out. Suddenly, a section of the cabin ripped open, and Olivia screamed. By the time we reached her, she was lying on the ground, with deep, foul-smelling scratches on her face and sheer terror in her eyes. She could only manage to whisper, "Her hand. It was so cold." And then she took her last breath. We were all in shock. Olivia was dead. We knew for certain this was no ordinary thing. It was truly the witch. We immediately decided to leave, but the forest was so dense and dark that we couldn't see the way out. We thought we'd wait until morning, but that was our biggest mistake. On the third night, fear was at its peak. The 3 of us, Sophia, Ava, and I, sat together in the middle of the cabin, near the fire. We held each other's hands, flinching at every sound. Suddenly, the room's temperature dropped rapidly, becoming so cold it felt like we were in a freezer. Then we heard that same old hum again, this time very close. Ava screamed, "She's here!" A dark shadow emerged from the other corner of the room, slowly taking the form of a woman. Her hair was white and disheveled, her face a skeletal structure, and her eyes glowed like burning embers. She let out a horrifying, piercing laugh that echoed in our ears. She moved towards Sophia. Sophia tried to run, but the witch seized her with one hand. Sophia began to scream, "Let me go! Let me go!" But her voice faded, and in a few moments, she fell lifeless to the ground. The witch tossed her body aside like a limp doll. Sophia was dead too. Now it was just Ava and me. Ava shrieked, "She's going to kill us all." The witch was now advancing towards me. I saw the hatred in her eyes that I had read about in the ancient tribal stories from history books. In my hand, I had an old wooden cross that I had found in an old box. I remembered local tales saying this witch was bound by ancient magic and could be weakened by something sacred. I gathered my courage. As the witch came closer, I saw her eyes blazing like red embers. She tried to attack me with her long, sharp claws. Without thinking, I threw the cross at her. The cross struck her chest. A horrifying shriek erupted, and the witch's body began to convulse. The cross embedded itself in her chest, and her body slowly withered, like old wood burning to ash. She mumbled something in a deep, terrifying voice, and then dissolved into a black smoke, scattering into nothingness. Peace suddenly filled the cabin, and the cold receded. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping. Ava was frozen with fear. As dawn broke, I roused Ava, and without wasting another moment, we both fled that terrifying cabin. We didn't look back. Even today, when I think about the shivering woods, my skin crawls. Olivia and Sophia's deaths changed me forever. I had defeated that witch, but her memories and the terror of that night will always live inside me. And I know that the curse of the shivering woods isn't truly gone. That spirit has simply gone to sleep for a while. Three Friends and the Witch of the Forest. In a quiet town called Willow Creek in Ohio, there lived three inseparable friends: Emily, Kate, and Sarah. They had grown up together and were now in high school. Adventurous by nature, the trio often went camping in the nearby woods. But one trip would change everything, a trip that only one of them would return from. This is the story that still sends chills down the spines of Willow Creek residents. A story too real and too horrifying to forget. It was a cold evening in 1997. The girls had planned a weekend camping trip to Black Hollow, a forest avoided by locals. Old folks whispered that the trees there breathed after dark, that the wind carried the cries of dead women, and that shadows sometimes moved against the direction of light. The girls, of course, dismissed it as folklore. They arrived at the forest by late afternoon. After setting up their tent and lighting a campfire, they laughed and chatted until dusk fell. But as the night deepened, Emily spotted something strange in the woods. A burnt, crooked cabin standing where no structure had ever been before. She called the others. Driven by curiosity, they approached. Kate pushed the door open. Inside was darkness, rot, and symbols scorched into the wood. A foul stench filled the air. On one wall, something had been scratched with fingernails. She waits beneath the trees. Do not speak her name. Before they could turn around, the door slammed shut. Suddenly, Kate was screaming. Something had grabbed her and dragged her into the shadows. Emily and Sarah scrambled to find her, but when they lit their flashlight, Kate was gone. Only smears of blood, strands of her hair, and a strange symbol remained. A triangle pointing downward with an eye in the center. Panic-stricken, Emily and Sarah bolted out of the cabin and ran blindly into the forest, shouting Kate's name. But their voices echoed back to them unnaturally, as if something inhuman was mocking them. The forest no longer looked familiar. Paths twisted in impossible ways. It was as though the trees themselves had moved. Then came the sound: crackling leaves, snapping branches. Something approaching. Without warning, a pale figure with flowing white hair and a hollow face, no eyes, no mouth, emerged from above and seized Sarah. Emily tried to pull her back, but the creature was too strong. With a shriek that cut through bone, it dragged Sarah into the night. All that remained were her shoes and a trail of blood. Emily was now alone. Desperate and terrified, she returned to the burnt cabin, perhaps to seek answers or revenge. There, she found an old chest with a tattered book inside. A grimoire. One passage stood out: "She cannot be killed from the outside. Burn her within her own circle." Emily followed the instructions. She cut her finger and drew a circle on the floor using salt, leaves, and her blood. She lit a fire and chanted from the book, "By the name of the forgotten dead, I summon you." The witch appeared in a burst of cold wind, her body floating, her limbs twisted unnaturally, her face still a black hole. She lunged forward, but stepped into the circle. Emily threw oil and lit it on fire. The creature screamed, a sound that shook the forest. Trees shook violently, the ground cracked, and birds dropped dead from the sky. And then, silence. At dawn, rescue teams found Emily near the ashes of the cabin. She was barely conscious, muttering words no one understood. The remains of Sarah and Kate were discovered beneath the burned cabin floor. Emily never spoke to the media, but in her journal, a final entry was found: she was real, and she still watches the woods. If anyone hears the whispers, don't answer. Locals now call it the Willow Creek Witches Incident. No one goes near Black Hollow after dark. Some claim to hear laughing at night. Some hikers say they've seen 3 girls running in the woods, only 2 disappear in thin air. And if you ever hear a girl's voice in the forest whisper, "Help me, I'm lost," don't turn around, because that voice is not human. Warning note: this incident was filed in local police archives under Unsolved Supernatural Occurrences. Several documentaries tried to investigate it but were